Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again with Sam Silverstein. I asked, for those who may not know, I live near Kerrville, Texas, which was the epicenter of the floods of July 4th, and they greatly impacted me. And I asked Sam if we could do a webinar where we took accountability and a culture of accountability and Sam's thoughts around accountability and discuss the role of accountability in a disaster. And we're going to focus on business disasters, but we wanted to see if there's a strategic framework for managing disruption. That was the genesis of this webinar. I really wanted to do this, as I told Sam, largely for me, but I hope you will get something out of it as well, because the flood made me realize, or made me focus, that sometimes you may lose everything. And I've lived through natural disasters, and I know Sam has as well. And I've seen people lose homes. I've seen people lose various parts of things, but I never see someone lose everything. And so what do you do when you have a physical facility that has lost everything? What do you do when your business is wiped out? What do you do when you've lost employees, lost family members, lost people you've worked with for years? And is there a way for us to use the concepts that Sam puts forward on accountability to do so? That's how we really want to focus, or at least I wanted to focus on that today. Sam, any thoughts as introductory thoughts?
Well, I think you did a good job for the two of us there, Tom. Hi, buddy. It's good to be here. When you approach right after those floods, I was really emotionally moved in that moment. We had a serious conversation. And quite frankly, the floods came on the heel of those disastrous tornadoes that we had here in St. Louis. And both of us experiencing in our communities something in the present sense. Not that we haven't experienced this in the past. It's starting to become repetitive. But what I've noticed is we have the natural disasters that affect people as human beings and affect businesses. We also have other disasters that do affect businesses, whether it be economic, geopolitical, natural disasters. They affect businesses and the people connected to those businesses. And so I think we can have a meaningful conversation, because I do think that while we can't predict the disasters and we can't prevent all of them, I think some are preventable or we can mitigate them. We can put ourselves in a position to potentially be best equipped to best manage when these things happen. And that's where I'd like to get this conversation to go today, so that we're thinking in the right way and we're preparing ourselves, our organizations, and our communities for when these events happen in the future. And they will.
All right, what we basically gave the introduction, but we want to certainly, perhaps the most propitious thing I heard coming out of the pandemic was something along the lines of the following. We used to have disaster recovery, then we moved to business resiliency. Now we have business as usual. And the person who said that to me meant that in the context of 2020, we now have a pandemic as no longer a black swan event, a worldwide pandemic, but it really focuses on everything. There are certainly unprecedented risks, but they're risks that we know now are potentials, and that can be a natural disaster, it can be a pandemic, it could be an economic shock, it could be geopolitical unrest, you could lose your workforce to an ICE raid, you could have a wide variety of things that could literally hamstring your entire business on a moment's notice. So how can you survive and thrive throughout these crises in a way that allows you literally to do business today, tomorrow? When the call comes in and you say, we've had a tornado and our plant's destroyed, they're like, Tom, I really feel sorry for you. I need this yesterday. And how are you going to deliver that? How are you going to deliver a service? One thing Sam has continually talked about is culture, and one that prioritizes accountability. And I really think there's a way for us to talk through this to see how accountability can be applied to each phase of the crisis that we may face in our businesses. So Sam, over to you on reminding us what is accountability.
And you use the phrase, business as usual or business as normal. Business as normal today is no longer normal. we better be expecting things to come our way because they will. From a natural disaster standpoint, we refuse to accept the science that issues are changing our climate and these storms are going to continue to happen. Years ago, as a child, it used to be an occasional hurricane that was disastrous. Now it's tornadoes, floods, the fires because of the lack of rain. It's all interwoven, and all of that's going to continue. So accountability. Accountability is keeping your commitments to people. Now, here's where we've let people down. It's not about the tactical commitments, it's relational commitments. And as an example, you have up here a commitment to the truth, not my truth or your truth, the truth, the whole truth, all the facts. A commitment to values, real values that we've identified, that this is how we do it here. A commitment to it's all of us, which basically says if you fail, I fail, and only when you succeed do I succeed, which means, Tom, in your community or in my community, the floods are 15 minutes from you. Where the tornadoes hit, 15 minutes from me. I was unscathed, but the fact that those people were not unscathed, that still impacts me. And if I ignore that and go, I was lucky and I'm not part of the solution, then I'm kidding myself. A commitment to stand by you. I think we have a typo on here, but it's a commitment to stand by you when all hell breaks loose. A commitment to a good reputation. These are all commitments that leaders take on, and when they take them on, it signifies to their people that they're in it with their people. They're not just in it for themselves, and that their people are not just tools and instruments that are there to potentially generate more revenue. That's the whole concept behind accountability. It's a relational topic, not a transactional one. The leader that says, I'm going to hold you accountable, is just trying to manipulate people to do more for them. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about true accountability between human beings.
So there are phases to every crisis. There's certainly pre-crisis. There's a crisis response. There's stabilization and recovery and growth. And Sam, here I wanted to maybe ask you, how do we use accountability literally in each phase? And I know we're going to spend some amount of time on the pre-crisis preparedness because you see that as a key component for every business going forward. And when I say crisis, I don't mean a downturn. I don't mean you lost some customers. A disaster crisis. You've lost everything. Your manufacturing facility is wiped out. Your IT infrastructure is gone. Your cloud is gone. Your people cannot get to work. Your people cannot log on because there's no power in the city of Houston for 3 days. A true crisis where it's literally beyond anything you've ever experienced. So where do you start with accountability on the pre-crisis preparedness, Sam?
So to me, Tom, this is everything. This is make or break it. I can't begin to tell you how many times we have leaders and organizations that come to us in the middle of a crisis or in the middle of a challenge that they're facing and they need help. And it's like, we want to help, but the reality is that it's the old question, Tom, when's the best time to dig a well? 20 years ago. When's the next best time? Right now. And so the organizations that dug the well 20 years ago have the water to drink when they need it. And the crisis is no different. And so these are human situations. Look, your building collapses. You could say that's a structural situation. Sure, it is a structural situation. But the ramification, the building doesn't care that it collapsed. The building doesn't have to worry about where its next meal is coming from. The building doesn't have children that it needs to feed, but the people do. And so any physical issue, any structural issue, any issue of nature, it will transcend to a human issue. If it's a human issue, then the human beings are at the center of it and at the center of the solution. So having this environment, this culture that prioritizes accountability, that inspires accountability, is what will position you to be able to deal with these situations when they present themselves. And it's going to present itself. And so is there a certain amount of physical readiness that you have? Absolutely, that we need to have in place. But it's this culture that inspires accountability, that if you work on it when you don't need it, and I don't know that I can honestly say there's a time when you don't need it, but when you work on it in the good times, then it's there for you in the tough times. And when I say it's there for you, it means people come together. People look out for each other. People take care of each other. The people that weren't affected are there for the people who are affected. If water's flooding into your home, you can't solve the problem. But Tom, if I get 100 people and we come and we each bring 20 sandbags, I don't know, that 2,000 sandbags could go a long way to keeping water out of your home. So it's always going to be a people-centric solution, which means we need to be connecting the people before all this happens.
Sam, next we have crisis response, but I really wanted to explore with you, how does accountability either help guide us or give us insight into acting decisively? And that obviously means leaders, but it also means employees. So how do accountability help us to act decisively when that true crisis hits?
I think that's where the focus comes into play. Are we focused on things? Or are we focused on people? It's just going to always come back to that. And so if you knew that a relative of yours was standing on the roof of their house and the water was rising, and you would do anything to get there to save them. You would try and find a canoe, find a boat, something that you can do to get there. You would exhaust all your personal resources to save that family member. What if it's not a family member? What if somebody said, there's a woman on a house a half a mile from here? Do you feel the same way? How do you feel about the people that you work with? What are your relationships with those individuals? And I think that crisis response is going to be connected to the relationships that are put into place. And when you create an environment that people work where there's no way they'd want to let someone down, when they care about each other, they care about their well-being, they care about each other's families, then people naturally rise in the moment, and that's when crisis response is at its greatest. Look, in your situation where you had the floods and it just did all that destruction, and in a matter of literally minutes, homes, people, lives were wiped away, you can't undo that. The question becomes, what can you do to bring some sort of care to those people who have been impacted, to try and lessen the impact as much as possible? And that's the human touch at that point, and that's going to always come back down to relationships.
Sam, next we have on step 3, stabilization. And that, obviously it's going to flow from your crisis response to try to contain the damage, but how can you then use accountability to help move forward to restoring operations? Is it pre-planning? Is it having lieutenants in place who can take over? Is it having a diffuse leadership team, or at least a diffused leadership team? So if one area doesn't have power, or one area is taken down by some natural disaster, another area can pick it up. How do we think through both containing the damage and then moving to restore our operations?
You know, these situations, it's hard to predict certain situations. Now, you could say, Sam, I think there's going to be an economic downturn at some point, and I would agree with you. What's the severity going to be? We have no idea. Could we have a recession in the next few years? Sure. We have them from time to time. That's not unreasonable. Could we have a full-on depression like you go back to the 20s and 30s? We haven't had that in 100 years, so we don't know it, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. We didn't know pandemic, and then it happened. And so then you say, okay, what do I need to do to be prepared? I need to have a certain amount of cash. I need to have a certain amount of resources available. And so I do believe that stabilization is based on preparedness in advance, of trying to think about things that potentially can come up, and being prepared, having your resources diversified, having them spread about, having the ability to get at the financial resources even in tough times, all those things are important. But then it's going to come down to the creative human spirit. It's going to come down to coming up with solutions that maybe we hadn't thought of in advance. And so maybe the advanced thinking says we put a generator in, but maybe in the crux of the situation, all this business, because the office building collapsed, maybe we come up with a way to take business into our homes, and all the employees band together and literally take the business into their homes and operate the business from their homes because they're creative and they're being there for each other. So that stabilization, I believe that creativity is going to come into play. But that creativity time is going to be something that's unlocked, that's unleashed in the good times when you create an environment where people feel safe, where they feel heard, where their opinions are sought. Because now in the tough times, they'll continue to share ideas, they'll continue to contribute because you were listening and you were wanting that even in the good times.
Well, and that really leads to number 4, because this is the one that, frankly, Sam, I see the most accountability the most clearly in, which is recovery and growth, learning, adapting, and improving. And for obviously the reasons you stated about restoring operations, but I see a potential growth opportunity through the tenets of a culture of accountability going forward to actually improve things after a crisis. Any thoughts on that?
I think at this point, what we're talking about is we need to learn from our experiences. If we're not learning from our experiences and we're blind to it, then that's negligence. And so to me, recovery and growth, learning, adapting, improving, it means recognizing that these situations can happen again. And not only these situations, others. What else could possibly happen? How else do I need to be prepared? What sort of, do I need to maintain a certain amount of bottled water around in case something goes wrong somewhere, that not just for myself, but for my community? What responsibility do I need to take on, not just for my family, but for the community around me? And I believe that's where the recovery and growth comes in. What are we learning that's positioning us to be more successful in the future? And you take something like the flood, and you and I were talking about this. Do these people rebuild? Where? Are we rebuilding in the same physical area and knowing full well that we're going back into the danger zone? That to me would be negligent. And it might be that's where you've lived your whole life, but the reality is we need to face the reality, and then we need to learn and grow from that.
As I said to our audience, I knew we were going to take a little bit deeper dive into each one of these tenets. And I know Sam is very passionate about pre-crisis preparedness. So Sam, maybe if you could take a little bit deeper dive and actually give some practical steps about what a business leader or a company can think about or think through in the pre-crisis preparedness phase.
This is interesting because we talk about a commitment to the truth. We talk about commitment to the values, commitment to it's all of us. Honest risk assessments, no sugarcoating vulnerabilities. Now, is the sky falling, Tom? It's like when we say an honest risk assessment, let's list everything that could possibly go wrong. And you might say, Sam, that's negative, isn't it? Yeah, I'm trying to be negative in this. I'm trying to list everything that could go wrong and then go, what can we be prepared for? I don't want to live in the negative, but I don't want to ignore it. And so why do you back up your computer? You back up your computer because your hard drive could crash. If you don't back up your computer, eventually when your hard drive does crash, you've lost it all. And so we know that happens. We know that hard drives crash. If we're not backing up our computer, we're negligent. We're negligent to ourselves, to our organization. We're negligent to our employees. Now think about that for a minute. If I'm not backing up the mainframe from my company and I have 100 employees, 1,000, 1,000,000, it doesn't matter what the number is, and we suffer financial loss because I haven't been backing up our computer, I've impacted the lives of everyone in our organization. That's negligent on my part as a leader. And so that to me is part of this pre-crisis preparedness. It's being honest and truthful with ourselves about what can possibly go wrong and how do we mitigate our exposure to that. And so the economy can have a downturn. Orders could decrease by 20%. What sort of financial plans have you put in place for when that happens? What are you doing to make sure that you never have to lay anyone off? Oh, when there's a downturn, we'll just lay people off. So you're just taking the lives of people and their families and you're saying it doesn't matter. They're here to serve us in the good times, and in the tough times, you're on your own. That to me is not being prepared. That is strictly looking out for your own best interests. It's not looking out for the interest of everyone, which is a commitment to it's all of us. So to me, these are all intertwined. It's looking at what can possibly go wrong, looking at history, knowing that history can repeat itself, realizing that you probably financially can't afford to do everything that you can't build a separate backup building to back up your building in a whole different climate. That might be a bit extreme, but I always say look for the edge, look for the most extreme, and then come back from that and find the place where you can mitigate most exposure. That's like insurance. You're mitigating most exposure with your insurance, your home insurance, life insurance, automobile insurance. You can't, health insurance. You can't always eliminate every exposure, but you can position yourself to where even if there is a crisis, you can absorb it. And when you think about your people and you constantly ask the question, how will this affect everyone in our organization? You'll come up with a different set of answers and you'll create a different set of preparedness.
Sam, next, crisis response. And it really struck me in listening to you that we often talk about accountability as relationships and relational. And we talk about our commitments to each other. But in the pre-crisis preparedness, you actually had practical steps where I saw accountability in action. And I see that accountability in action again in your crisis response. So could you take us through how accountability is so critical again, but yet once again with the practical steps we have?
What's the leader doing? Is the leader putting their interests before the people? Is the leader off on holiday? Is the leader minimizing what's going on? Or is the leader being just honest about the situation, rolling up their sleeves, getting in the mud, and dealing with the situation? Because that's the kind of leader that I want. That's the kind of leader I want to be associated with. And many times leaders of organizations, they've been drawing a pretty good income. They're financially, if they've been responsible with their resources, they're financially in a good place. So they could go without income for a week, a month, a year. But most of your employees can't. Most people are check to check. They have children, they have families, they have house payments they need to make. They need to feed their babies. What are the leaders doing to put that up front? And that to me is where crisis response is paramount. What are we doing for our people, the people that have generated our success? And many times leaders are right out there, and then sometimes leaders aren't. They make it about them. It's about how great they are, how great they're responding to the situation, or this is a problem because of the leader before. No, stop that. Look at what the issues are that your people are facing and get out there and solve those problems. Not because you want to look good for 10 seconds on Instagram, not because you want to look good on the nightly news, but because your people are hurting. and you're there for your people. And I think when you look at it that way, crisis response will go a lot smoother.
Sam, next we have our stabilization phase. And once again, the commitments that you make through accountability and how they help you, how do those translate into some of the practical steps we suggest?
I want to look at truth here because I think this is important. It's very common for today for leaders to just say something, whether it's true or not, so that they can justify making the choices that they're making. And that's self-serving. That's not about the people. And that's not in government, not in business, not in the community, not even in families. And so I think it's time that we really push that we get back to the truth, because that's what hurts us in this stabilization phase. But when you're putting the truth out there, when you're making ethical decisions, when you're standing by your people, then even if the news is bad news, but you're being honest about it and you're showing what you're doing with it, I feel like that brings people together. But if we just flood untruths out there, it never brings people together. And so you don't successfully navigate through the stabilization. And I think that when your decisions are connected to your values and the facts are the truth, whether that's good news or bad news, but it's the truth, then I think people see that and they respect you for that.
Sam, I'd like to draw your attention, number one, under the practical steps, because for a large part of this webinar, we have talked about the relationships you have inside of an organization, leaders to employees to leaders, employees to each other. But here we take a look at externals, which are suppliers and customers. And you've certainly run a business where you depended on raw supplies, and you've certainly run a business where you depended on customers for sales. Could you say a few words about the role of accountability for stakeholders who may be outside of your organization, and maybe even not why it's so critical, but how it can be literally such a market differentiator if you have accountability with external stakeholders to your organization?
So that's a brilliant question, Tom. And I used to be a partner in a window door manufacturing business. There is one commodity that you have to make a window. You want to guess what that is?
It's not sugar.
Nope, it's glass. Got to have glass. You can't make a window without glass. You got to have glass. So no matter what framing material you're using, no matter how you're assembling it, all that stuff's great, but if you don't have a sheet of glass, how do you make a window? There was a time in where glass was in short supply. There was a shortage of glass. Now, we always discounted our bills. We wanted to make sure we paid our suppliers not just promptly, super promptly. We wanted them to know that we had their backs, because cash flow is important in a business. And when glass became not a commodity, but a scarcity, then the suppliers that we had taken care of in our relationship with them were always there to take care of us. And we might have been pulling the last sheet of glass out of a pallet of glass when a truck backed up to the dock with 10 more pallets on that truck. But we never ran out. It might have gotten close, but we never ran out. They never let us run out. We had their back all the time. We paid their bills. We made sure to take care of them. They had our back. That's accountability. That's standing by each other. And then some new supplier comes in and wants to sell us a few pennies less. We're not going to switch to that new supplier, because our supplier always had our back. We're going to continue to have their back. And when you build relationships like that, then those become truly valuable relationships, because you're there to take care of each other. Now think about that, how that plays out internally in a business as well as externally. How does that play in the community? What would happen, Tom, what would happen if everyone truly had everyone's back? Think about the impact that would have in society. And I don't think that's that difficult, but people don't always think that way necessarily.
And then we move to recovery and rebuild. And as I said, when we went through the list of all four of these, I saw, to me, most clearly accountability in this. But I think some of the practical steps really drive that message home and show how, even in the worst of disasters, you can move forward in a way that will be positive at the end of the day. How do you see all this in terms of some of the practical steps, Sam?
Yeah, I think you've got it nailed. And I think this is about lessons learned and trust, okay? If we go back and if we just go back and rebuild and let the flood come get us again, if we go back and operate our business in the same way and let the same economic issues get us again, then we're not being responsible, not for ourselves. We're not being responsible for everyone that's involved in the organization. And so you want to reinforce trust, stay with the truth, be transparent, communicate every step of the way, and truly be there for your people. That builds that trust. And when that trust is high, then the people are always going to be there for you. A relationship is never one way. A good relationship, is always a two-way relationship. Either side is looking to be there for the other side. And when you do, that's accountability in action. And that means that people are going to go, whoa, let's not redo this the same way, because we could have the same problem again. And leadership is listening, and leadership is communicating the decisions that they're making. And so a lot of times leaders want to hold the power. The small leader thinks that it's all about the power. The big leader really knows it's not about controlling the power. It's about understanding what the vision and mission is, and then empowering your people to make that happen. And when you create those kinds of relationships, then I really believe that you're laying the foundation for a solid recovery. You're rebuilding for the future, and then you're positioning your organization to be better prepared the next time a tangible situation presents itself.
So we're going to move to some key takeaways and really help our audience understand some of the specifics that we think you can use. These are going to be self-evident, hopefully, to most, but let's go ahead and take a deep dive into accountability as being proactive and not reactive. Why is that?
That's the key, Tom. It's about being proactive, because when it's reactive, you're trying to create something after the fact. And you built the firehouse, you put the fire trucks in, you trained the firemen to be ready. You have a system so that they can communicate, so that when there is a fire, they can come and put it out. That's proactive. Reactive would be, my house is on fire. Tom, what do you think we should do? I think maybe we need to create a fire department and have trucks and people and water, and great. By the time you do all that, the house is burned down. And so it's the same way with accountability in organizations and in communities. You put this in place, you create this when times are good, so that when times are tough, you're ready to jump into action, to leap into action, to move quickly. And that means that you've built this in advance, and you've built the commitments between people. And commitments create resilience, and resilience can withstand the most difficult of situations. We talk about truth, values, collective ownership. It's all going to come down to trust. And when you've created trust, when people trust each other because of their history of actions that support those trustful relationships, you have a reputation that people want to protect and maintain. They thrive in this environment of accountability, and they work hard to maintain that environment of accountability.
So what are some of the call to action steps we can take? And I'm going to maybe start here, Sam, because as I play in the realm of risk management, and so this to me is something that every leader does or should do. And I'm going to ask you to overlay this on accountability. Number one, take a look inside, audit your organization's current crisis readiness through the lens of accountability. I'm going to ask you how to do that, Sam. Train. I have here trained leaders, but I need to expand that to train everyone because everyone has a role in this. And how does accountability help us? And then integrate, put a plan in place, train on that plan, implement that plan, and integrate it into your operations. Can you have a book on the shelf? Yes. That can be great if you have a notebook. Or what if that shelf's gone? What if the notebook's gone? Where are you going to integrate that language into your actions going forward? So maybe, Sam, if I've tried to give a framework there, but can you maybe slot in how you see accountability as each one of those? And I'm going to even start by re-emphasizing what you've talked to us about in terms of pre-crisis and truth, that you must be realistic, rational, and use the truth to assess your readiness.
You know, what you measure, you treasure. So let's measure things, and first of all, let's measure our readiness. Do you have somebody whose responsibility is to say, what could go wrong? What's the likelihood of that going wrong? And what have we done to prepare ourselves in case it does go wrong? And I think that an individual or committee having this conversation from time to time in an organization is a very valuable exercise. If you're doing a leadership retreat and you have a 2-day retreat and you're planning and you're strategizing and creating the future and you're looking at your vision and your mission and all that stuff, if you're not taking an hour for the leadership team to say, okay, what are all the barriers to success in terms of unexpected tragedy that we could face? And how would we mitigate those if we faced them? If you're not doing that, I think you're being negligent to all the stakeholders of the organization, whether they be employees, suppliers, or customers, or investors. So let's audit all of that. The other thing is, if you truly buy into the idea that accountability, an environment of accountability, is one that is going to nurture a better foundation and a better positioning to be able to handle a crisis and to recover from the crisis, then I would say you need to audit your culture. That's why we have the culture audit. We go in, we look at the culture of an organization, we measure 15 indices, we know what's working, what's not working, and then we as leadership make a committed effort to creating the absolute best culture that we can create. That's another audit that I believe that's important and foundational. So those are the steps on the front end. And then the ongoing is, we got to be continuously training, developing our leaders, because when we develop leaders at all levels of an organization and they understand what accountability is and they can step it out, then that reinforces relationships at all levels of the organization. That supports your culture, and then that prepares you for the inevitable, which is a crisis situation. The crisis situation is when the alarm bell goes off at the firehouse. And that's when all the firefighters, all the men and women come together in that moment. That's when they're sliding down the poles, stepping into their pants and their boots, getting onto the truck, moving into action. They're all coming together and operating as a team because you've worked hard on the front end. You've audited anything that's going on within the organization so you know what can go wrong. You've prepared yourself. You built this environment of accountability. You've developed your leaders, and in developing leaders, you've raised the floor, you've raised the ceiling even on how you communicate, and now in a moment of crisis, you're in the best possible position to deal with it.
We've got more information on the culture audit here and a little bit on it. But before we get to a few words about the culture audit, Sam, there's a couple of other questions I really want to explore with you. And I've heard some people say there are no difficult conversations. There are only conversations about difficult subjects. And based on what I saw on July 4th, there were some very difficult conversations. From the business perspective, how should you have a conversation with your employees, with your coworkers, if you've lost an employee to a disaster, if your business literally is knocked from the ground because of a tornado, any of those things that are truly catastrophic, how does accountability help us, help the leader, and help employees in that situation?
We've talked about this, Tom. There's the leader that goes, this isn't personal, this is business. And they want to make it about every conversation is personal. Every conversation is personal, even if you're only discussing business. Look, my next door neighbor yesterday had been returned. My next door neighbor returned from the funeral of a parent. Now, there's a tree on the property line that's dead and leaning in our direction. You think that's the right time to bring up the fact that tree is leaning in the wrong direction? I'd love to get that tree removed. It's their tree. It's leaning in my direction. It's leaning on another tree. It could potentially fall onto the house. They just lost a loved one. Come on. And so I think the leaders that don't understand the personal ramifications, their emotional intelligence is so low that it's not measurable. This is a human experience that we're all going through. Our tombstones aren't engraved with the companies that we worked for and the titles that we held. And anyone that thinks that their business, their organization is more important than my family, they're kidding themselves. And they're not a true leader. They might hold the position, they might have the title, but they're not really a leader. And the story that comes to mind quite simply is this, is my youngest daughter's best friend lived in Kansas City, about 4.5 hours away from St. Louis. And one day she was given the tragic news that her brother had died from suicide. She was scurrying to get out of the office and to get in her car and to get home to her parents and to deal with the aftermath of that situation. And the last thing her boss said to her on the way out the door is, "So, when do you think you'll be able to get back?" And when I heard that, I was infuriated. The boss should have said, "Are you driving? I don't want you should be flying home. You shouldn't be driving right now. Let me get you there. Let me get you a plane ticket. The boss should have been concerned about what this young lady was experiencing, feeling, and going through, as well as her family. That's the human response. And when human beings failed to step up with the human response, then they're not leading. They're distracting. They're annoying. They're getting in the way. And so I know that some of these conversations are difficult, and I have difficulties many times having these difficult conversations. They're not easy for me, but the one thing that I always ask myself is I try to take a breath, I step back, and I go, what is that individual going through? What are they experiencing? And what do they need right now? That's the bottom line. What do they need in this moment? Not what do I need, not do I need that tree removed. No, what do they need? Is it compassion? Is it cash? Is it a place to sleep? Is it a meal? Is it a shoulder to cry on? What do they need? Provide for them what they need, and you're building a relationship that will last a lifetime. That's accountability in action, and that's what needs to be done in these difficult situations.
Sam, let me flip. We've got about 10 minutes, so let me flip the question to the following. Let's go away from a natural disaster to an economic disaster, or perhaps a geopolitical disaster, or even a pandemic disaster, which might take away an entire area of your supply chain, where it truly is an economic impact. And the role of accountability in having those conversations, but I'm equally interested in how accountability would allow employees to step forward with perhaps ideas, suggestions, or ways that a leader hadn't thought of, and that a leader can essentially crowdsource his own intelligence from his own employees because of accountability.
When you truly empower your people, Tom, you open the floodgate of input, ideas, resources, information. And I believe that positions you. And so what happens is you think differently than I do. And Tom thinks differently, or Wallace, or Andy, or anyone watching this after the fact in a recording. We all think a little bit differently. We see differently, and we see different things. And when you truly empower your people, then they'll start to see things that you haven't seen. And when you as a leader put out there that we want to be prepared. We want to think about the things that most organizations don't think about so that we can be prepared. Then what happens is all these people in the organization, if they're truly empowered, they're going to start asking questions, and they're going to start seeing things and thinking of things that will position us to be ready for these events that are going to happen. Yeah, are we going to face natural disasters? Sure. Well, there's a greater likelihood that we're going to face a severe downturn in economic conditions, that the extreme inflation that we're already starting to see from the tariffs are going to infiltrate businesses. What's going to happen? All these, to me, it's about empowering the people and putting the question out there. All creative thought starts with a question. If you ask the question and empower your people, they'll come up with the answers.
All right. If any of our listeners have any questions, now might be the time, or even any comments. Sam, I really wanted to thank you. As I said when we started this presentation, I really wanted to do this for me as much as anyone because I needed this catharsis. So I wanted to thank you for helping me for being part of my recovery as well. I don't see any questions, so we'll just go ahead and stop our screen share. But before we do, Sam, could you say a few words about the culture audit?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I always enjoy our conversations, and I enjoy the participation, whether someone's involved live or they're simply watching the replay. These are meaningful conversations to me individually, and you always spark a creativity in me, and I appreciate that, Tom. This is a difficult situation for you and your community, and so hopefully what we've spoken on today will help you or help those around you. And those that are participating, let's share this with other people, because we need to prepare ourselves individually and organizationally. We need to be prepared for natural disasters, economic disasters. These are things that are going to happen. And if we're prepared, then we lessen the impact on other human beings. And that's a gift. That's a gift. So often we look at and we focus on growth. We want to grow our organization, and we're not looking at sustainability. And there's a difference between growth and sustainability. And part of sustainability is being prepared for natural disasters. And part of that comes down to building this environment of accountability where people truly care about each other, where we look after each other. And because we're looking after each other, we're looking after the organization. And so that's why we offer the culture audit. It's our tool that gives the data that we need to be able to help a leader determine what's next. What do we need to do next to develop our leaders? What do we need to do next to develop our people and our culture so that we have a culture that is, in essence, an environment of accountability, and it positions us to be in the best possible place, not only in good times, but when times are tough.
So, Sam, we've had one question come in. I think it's pretty much right up your alley. But the question is from Tom Mapp: how do you recommend empowering people, and maybe some practical steps using accountability?
It's a great question, Tom, and I appreciate that. There's an interesting thing about people. They want to have a voice. You want to empower people, give them a voice. Now, here's what leaders do, Tom. I have an open door policy. Anyone can come into my office at any time and share their opinion with me. I know one leader, he literally took his door off the hinges to show that he had an open door policy. Now, that's crazy, but okay. Now, there's two problems with that. One, the open door policy. You can come in and share what you think at any time. Great. What's the track record in the organization of leadership doing something with the feedback that they're getting? That's my first question. Is there evidence that when people share concerns, thoughts, issues, that leadership is making decisions around that? Because if there's evidence that decisions are made and they address these situations, that's going to encourage it to continue. But if there's evidence that they actually don't make decisions around that, then that's going to shut it down, and that's not empowering people. But here's the thing that's overlooked. People communicate differently. You know, Tom, you asked a question. I appreciate that. Someone else might not come forward with the question. Someone else might not come into the leader's office. And so as a leader, we need to go to them, because there are people in an organization. If you go to them and you go, Sue, how's it going today? What challenges, in your opinion, Sue, what's the one thing that I need to know about that I might not know about? Because when you go to your people, then the people that don't like to step forward, they'll open up, they'll share. And when you create this understanding that people's voices are wanted, that you actually seek them out, that you're responding to them, then you're going to be empowering your people. And they will come forward with all the solutions for all the challenges, because the people that are closest to the situation are usually best equipped to solve it. So thanks for that question, Tom. I appreciate it.
So I wanted to thank everyone, and especially thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you everyone that participated, and we look forward to next time and next conversation.
Compliance Podcast Network. Start your mornings with daily compliance news, quick, sharp updates on the top compliance and ethics stories in under 5 minutes every morning in Compliance Podcast Network. Because compliance never sleeps. Need practical advice fast? Check out Compliance Tip of the Day. One actionable idea to level up your program. Short and sweet, every day on Compliance Podcast Network. Got 10 minutes? We've got the week's top 10 stories. 10 for 10 brings you the big compliance headlines. Fast, fun, and focused. Every Saturday on Compliance Podcast Network. And don't miss the Sunday Book Review, where compliance meets culture through must-read books and big ideas every Sunday in Compliance Podcast Network. Whether you're in the office, on a walk, or commuting, stay smart, stay ethical, stay tuned. Only on the Compliance Podcast Network. Available wherever you listen to podcasts.